we go east-southeast now to our lease, which is more closer. Yeah, that sounds right. It's closer to the Ohio River at this point. And I mean, now I feel like we're in Illinois river bottom country, right? I mean, it is flat as a pancake, big ag fields, little blocks of timber.
That whole area it felt better in my opinion.
And so we go over, we go to the wrong house first. She says she didn't like me. She said, yeah, you're not supposed to be here. Go talk to Hobart. I was like, oh, I thought this was Hobart's house. Apparently not.
Yeah.
Okay. So go to Hobart's house. Hobart's on home.
Well, we walked.
And we've called the number that we were given a bunch of times and no luck. So at this point, I'm like, well, shit. We can't do much. And technically, our lease doesn't start there until tomorrow. Yeah. But it was like, hey, we're in the area. We just want to walk it.
March 31st, dude. Almost out of it.
I know, crazy.
Almost out of it.
So we're kind of defeated at this point, of which then it's like, okay, there's a cool little national wildlife refuge right down the road. Like, let's just see if we can hunt that again. Kind of a common theme here. They tell me
I'm pretty sure that was legal.
They tell me what number to call to talk to the manager. I call that number. An old lady answers. She's like, you have the wrong number. I double check that number with Colton. That's what they said on the recording. So I don't understand. Anyways, we walk it, shed hunt it.
555.
Yeah.
5-5.
And that was wet, but man, there was a ton of deer sign in there.
Yeah, that was crazy. This was just like it was a refuge?
Yes.
Some kind of refuge there?
It's a national wildlife refuge.
National wildlife refuge. And so
different than like a refuge that you can't
We
hunt.
did our very best to interpret the signage. Like it seemed like you could be on it. You could even hunt on it. But you just couldn't take vehicles on it.
Couldn't take vehicles on it.
So we parked at the front and
it was thick too.
Yeah, it was nasty. So we just did a big loop out around that, and
we hit that one bedding area, man. There was big bucks in there. I mean, we literally were like, okay, hey, we're going to go back to the north, and then we're going to cut this corner. We're going to hit a river, and then we'll take this whole thing front. And then next thing I know, I'm like, oh, the car's like right here.
Yeah.
It's just like a giant circle. We just got looped around. But it was thick. It was gnarly. But then Hobart called, and he's like, hey, because we left him a note. He's like, hey, sorry I missed you. Like, and he's giving me the rundown, and it sounds good. He's like, man, there are deer everywhere here.
It was a trip.
There's deer everywhere. And I'm like, all right, I like this. I was like, so like, what have the people in the past done? He's like, well, he's been in.
He's like, shit, man, you want to shoot buck? He's like, oh, it's like we got nothing but buck.
Yeah, I was like, I like this. This is sounding really good to me, right? And he's been in the program for 4 years for leasing. Last year, the guys were from, I think, Syracuse, New York is what he said. And he's like, yeah, man. He's like, they rolled in, bow hunters. He's like, they rolled in.
Shot their big
that
buck.
Night, shot that buck. Yeah, shot their buck, never came back. And listen, where you're at in these areas, I mean, these guys are just all farmers, right? They're all farmers. They're all trying to make a living. They're cash renting and stuff like that. He's cash renting.
Yeah.
But the deer damage is insane. He's like, man, if I plant beans, he's like, these deer just wipe these things out. There's too many of them. So he's like, will you guys shoot does? And we're like, yes. I was like, well, how many do you want shot? He's like, all of them. Mm-hmm. Like, just go. And we're like, okay, like, there's probably a bunch of deer. Well, then we go back to that corner with them, and there's deer just like running everywhere. Mm-hmm. And it's weird because it's so big and flat and open, but it still feels so secluded. Mm-hmm. And you can just tell, I mean,
well, it is. There's just not much back there, and it doesn't help, or it doesn't hurt that behind it is all that public land.
The big swamp.
I'm pretty sure, it's all flooded timber. I think once you get back there and across that river, it's
swamp donkeys.
Flooded, just straight swamp donks. What makes that lease so good is the fact that it butts up to this giant piece of, like, you wouldn't even call it CRP. It's
impenetrable.
It's impenetrable thicket, and it looks like the Yukon.
Yes,
literally.
It's just tunnels. You can just see deer tunnels just
so
going.
Ridiculous. Well, dude, we got back in there, and there's an old creek that runs out of the. Mm-hmm. I guess it's a tributary or a runoff or something. Mm-hmm. I bet there's some beavers in that thing. There's a lot of beaver signs. There's probably a beaver in there that's like 10 or 12 years old. Legitimately, beavers. It is just so.
That's a mature beaver.
Wild and remote. Yeah, it was cool, but we found a really good spot. I mean, it's a pretty obvious, like, where it transitions from, our lease property into this
really tight pinch
into this giant thicket. We found a nice trail that kind of runs the distance of it with some old scrapes. Found a good stand tree. That's where we had seen those deer coming out into the field. I mean, it just seems like the pinnacle of that.
I picked up that 5-point shed right there, right at that corner as well.
Picked up, but that was a freshie, the first freshie
we found. Yeah. And Weston and I had been,
What was that, a banging 1.5-year-old?
Oh my God. Yeah. Just a giant 1.5-year-old. Yeah. And we were in the woods a little bit. And man, when we were coming up, I'm talking just giant rubs, just tore up all over the place, old scrapes. And I mean,
right away, I found a couple oldies in there. That was what was real weird is we kept finding these old. It was March 26th.
Yeah, no freshies.
No freshies, just all old sheds, which tells us it likely has not been walked. It's just weird.
And that property will be interesting because there's a lot of field on that side. You know, and Hobart's telling us he's sitting there, you know, describing the bucks he's seeing in the cornfield across the road, which sounds like a lot.
He was like. He was making fun of the guy who put the giant redneck across the road. He's like, I don't know why they're putting it over there, man. He's like, all the deer are over here. He's like, that's where he's got to be.
Yeah. It's so when you get somebody that like he's got no desire nor any concept of really hunting, and he's just like, yeah, he's like, I just like would sit right there in the front yard. They just come in the yard and you just shoot them.
He's like, you guys going back in there today? He's like, you must be packing some shit. You going back in there? It's like, what do you mean? He's like, oh yeah. He's like, mountain lions. He's like, all kinds of stuff. I was like, what are you talking about?
I was like, how long have you lived here? He's like, my whole life. Haven't been back there since I was a kid.
Since I was 5. He's like,
no, what a good guy. I mean, that's it, man. Like, and what a gamble too, because again, we saw that this property came up. It was like, yeah, that looks like a good property. It's in the right area. Leased it. Have no idea what it looks like. Have no idea what the landowner is going to be like. You go in, you meet a guy like that, super guy, dude would do anything for you, minus going back in those woods because he thinks there's mountain lions that are going to eat him. But other than that, he'll do whatever you want. Like, he's going to be the guy who calls us in October and he's like, man, there's bucks all over the place. You better get down here.
Yeah, he was a good dude.
But you start to hear some of the stories, just like kind of that first lease, you know, and I think those guys at one point had hunted, you know, Hobart has not, but, you know, he very much was like, yeah, you know, he's telling the story about, you know, watching these does play around in his front yard last year, right? And then he's like, yeah, I'm like watching, and he's like, I see something moving, like in the woods. I'm not sure. And I'm thinking, he's like, it's bobcat, you know, coyote. He's like, outside. He said, biggest buck I've ever seen. He said, I stopped counting after 12 points. Was that just
last year, wasn't it? Yeah. And he's like, I'm pretty sure that deer is still around. He's like, it was a giant.
Yeah. He said, he said, that's the one I wish I had a camera for.
I'm real interested to see what that
He made it seem like, I mean, when you think that there's potential of like 170, 180, 190 class deer in those kind of areas, that sounds like it because this guy's probably seeing 150s, 160s pretty consistently. I mean, it's all open field.
He's like, I stopped counting at 12. So I assume he was like a mainframe 12.
With just gnarly shit all over.
Mm-hmm. Who knows? Could have been just a freak giant 8-point or something.
And he's dead.
Who knows? But
yeah, it was crazy though.
Take me